Well, I have a YouTube page that's dedicated to Counter-Strike. I've been playing Counter-Strike for 20 some years, and it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it is based on, I'm sure you've heard that story from a lot of people, how they've been around the game for a long time.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
and personally for me, like my channel is kind of centered around the integrity of Counter-Strike. I just did a video about match fixing. I've done videos
Yeah.
about people that have cheated in the past and stuff like that. And I just thought it'd be
Yeah.
great to talk to you and get your
Sure.
take on kind of how you fit into ESIC and how ESIC can prevent cheating and stuff like that in Counter-Strike and what kind of policies they do,
Sure.
I guess, to help out the integrity of the Counter-Strike community.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem at all. And look, I come at this from two different angles. The one is the cheating to win element, which primarily around software hacks, and to some extent DDoS attacks and that kind of slowing your opponent down kind of methods, which seems to be less and less prevalent. It's just easier to detect these days. But and then to a lesser extent doping, all of which are kind of subsets of trying to win, trying to gain an unfair advantage over your opponent. But then primarily ESIC's role with tournament organizers is to prevent match fixing, because cheating is primarily a technological issue, and one that you can address through a range of measures, but ultimately what you're trying to do is detect the use of alien software. That's the primary kind of method, whereas match fixing is not something that you can detect as a tournament organizer from kind of inside your system, unless somebody's deliberately playing so badly and you have access to the betting markets to indicate that something is wrong.
Right.
But generally, you can't watch match play and decide that something is fixed. You have to come at it from the betting angle. You can't do it the other way. Well, so say you can't, but it's very, very difficult to do it the other way around.
Right. I've said in the past, talking about Barry Bonds, it doesn't matter if he hit 100 home runs in 1 year. You can't suspend him based on his performance in the game or based on what happened in the game. You need to find the actual proof, right, before you can levy a suspension.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, look, you can get corroborative evidence from the way people perform, but you've got to have something else if you're going to talk about doping, for example. You can't just say, well, this guy's improved 20% in the past 12 months in his aerobic capacity, or whatever it is, and kind of go, well, that the only explanation for that is doping. And it's exactly the same in match fixing, is that people can play badly. I mean, if you look at a game like golf, Rory McIlroy, Tiger Woods, Justin Thomas, these guys can all miss a 3-foot putt.
Yeah.
How are you going to say he did it on purpose unless you've got really, really strong betting evidence? In other words, what was his incentive to miss? And it's the same. It works both ways. So for us, cheating, I would say my observation with cheating at high level, because clearly at amateur level, cheating is rife because you've got idiot young boys playing and they download crap off the internet and they cheat, and then Valve bans them, and then they open a new account and they carry on. Hopefully they've learned their lessons. The VAC system is a bit of a sledgehammer, but it does tend to correct behavior at the lower levels where the cheating is rampant. As soon as you get to a higher level, you either paying for what you hope is an undetectable cheat, and that's getting increasingly difficult and increasingly expensive, or where you succeed, and this is where we kind of have kicked in over the last number of years at professional level and high level tournaments, is that generally you're not caught by anti-cheat, you're caught by your opponents. Good players know when you're playing too well. It's just, I would say of every high level cheating case that I've dealt with in the last 3 years,
Is this in Counter-Strike?
Sorry?
Is that in Counter-Strike?
In Counter-Strike.
That you're referring to? Okay.
The trigger for the case has been complaints from the opponents,
Right.
not anti-cheat. Right. And in many times, it's actually been really, really hard to find the cheat. Most of the time, the reason we've been able to take action against a player is because when they've been confronted with the allegation, they've confessed. Not because we found the software. You know, it's once you know what you're looking for, you can find it. But generally speaking, particularly with online play, it's really, really hard if people are using sophisticated cheat. And again,
For sure.
you know, the parallel with doping is the better the anti-cheat, the better the cheats get. And it's whilst eventually you paint the cheats into a corner where it's more or less impossible to come up with something effective, we're in that period before that happens where the majority of high-level cheating is caught by your opponents knowing or accusing you of cheating because you're just playing too well.
I didn't know that ESIC was involved in a case with CSGO players.
Yeah, we've done quite a few. I mean, going back to Forsaken, the Optic India case, but yeah, we've dealt with quite a number actually, and it's been. As I say, I'm trying to think of one that was caught by anti-cheat. I think we'd have to go back at least 4 years to the last one at professional level where somebody was caught with anti-cheat.
Right. I wanted to ask a little bit about kind of what I mentioned in the email as well about peripherals and how Riot Games doesn't allow players to bring their own peripherals into games, but in Counter-Strike we've always allowed that. And I guess anecdotally, I'll mention kind of what I mentioned in the email too, is that the vulnerability that we're worried about here with player-provided mices is bad USB. And I've personally interviewed bad USB experts that agreed. And one of them even said that he was, someone attempted to commission him to put software into mice. So is that something that ESIC can look at policy-wise and kind of...
Oh, look, we have. I mean, I'm well aware of this. The difficulty is that there's that dynamic between the tournament, or particularly in the Counter-Strike scene, because Valve don't really interfere in the regulation of Counter-Strike. It's a highly competitive tournament organizer situation. You know, you've got your dominant leagues like Pro League, Blast Premier, to some extent Flashpoint, and one or two others. But what it means is that if you're in a top-tier team, let's say top 20, top 25 team, you're in high demand from the TOs, right? They want you as a, you know, if you're Astralis or Virtus Pro or any, you know, basically anyone in that bracket, you could play every week, all week, right? There's that many tournaments at your disposal. And so you can be a bit picky. And so the dynamic between the teams and the tournament organizers is far more balanced in Counter-Strike than it is in League of Legends, where Riot run the scene and they can say whatever the hell they like, and the teams can do nothing about it. They can say, right, we're going to provide out-the-box peripherals for everybody, and the fact that you've practiced with this keyboard or you're sponsored by this peripherals maker is just tough shit, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nowhere else to go. If you own a franchise or you play top level League of Legends, where are you going to go if you can't play in a Riot competition? Right? There's nowhere to go. In Counter-Strike, you've got huge choices, and so when the TOs under my, you know, I was stunned when I came into esports sort of 5 years ago, to find out when I was looking at, particularly at LAN events, you know, at the safety and security issues around LAN events. And I said, well, okay, so clearly, you know, you've got all the standard equipment. I was looking at, you know, who sets up the computer, basically what are the vulnerabilities in the system?
Yeah.
And they were taking me through this. I remember it was at ESL1. Was ESL1 Frankfurt with Dota 2 actually was my first one. That would have been 2015. And you know, I said, well, where are the keyboards and the mouse mats and the thing? Oh no, the players bring their own. I was like, oh, that's bullshit. that can't be right. And we got in a debate for about a year, and then basically, and not just ESL, everybody I spoke to said, we're not in a position to tell the top teams and players that we're going to impose standard equipment on this because they've got, high value sponsorships. And then, they're just used to playing with a particular mouse, with a particular mat, with a particular keyboard. And, it would degrade, and I think this is a reasonably fair argument, right? It would degrade performance for some players to say, right, we're all using this keyboard, we're all using, and this is the other side, is they provide you with the specs of their setup.
Yep.
And then as a TO, you've got to go out and spend huge amounts of money to replicate every single player's setup for your LAN. And it's like, well, how, at what end of the budget does this work, right? Do you just say, right, guys, we're going to provide the standard equipment, or you send us a list of your equipment and we're going to go out and buy it so that we've got out the box stuff for you. And then some guy will tell you that he's using the same mouse he's used for 5 years and there is no replica. There is no. And so we've run around this initially. Look, I haven't touched the subject for 2 years because I hit such a brick wall on it back sort of 2016, 17, that effectively I just gave up on it because the bargaining position of the TOs is just not strong enough to go to the Counter-Strike teams and orgs and players and say, this is how we're going to do it, because they won't.
Is it maybe something that Valve could have an overseeing, or if Valve stepped in, would they be able to do it?
Well, they could, but they won't. It's like saying, well, Valve should create a tournament structure for Counter-Strike, or they should oversee a standard set of rules. They're not going to. So, it's just a fantasy. Valve are not going to get involved in anything other than the majors. It's just, it would be such a massive turnaround in their company philosophy and their historic kind of attitude towards esports that I think the whole Counter-Strike scene would fall off its chair if Valve came along and said, all right, from now on, we're going to do this, this, and this.
I mean, so, typically when they do things, they do a bad job historically, or whenever something gets changed in the game.
They just don't. Esports is a very, very low priority for Valve. They're a games company. They're interested, of course, in X million people playing Counter-Strike on a regular basis, but esports is just a very useful marketing overlay for that.
Right.
They don't make money out of it. I mean, at least not directly,
Yeah. You mentioned when you came in 5 years ago how poor the security controls were at these LAN environments, and I assume you're not a computer science expert or anything like that, and you were able to identify these issues.
No.
I think that may have answered my next question, which was, will these tournament organizers ever consider maybe getting pen tested, which is like a security firm would come in and look at which vulnerabilities exist in the LAN environment and maybe give advice on what can be remediated? Is that just not in the budget type of argument again, or?
No, look, we've done it over the years to some extent. So a lot of because I used to do a lot of security work in traditional sport. And so, I worked with ESL, particularly in the first couple of years, and a huge amount of what I recommended got implemented. It's still not perfect. And I think what I would love them to do, and we did put a proposal forward for this, but I'm going back now, probably end of 2016, where we said, look, get a security expert in, a live event security expert from outside of esports to come and look at this from a vulnerability point of view, to make recommendations. And I think we even went as far as getting quotes for the various TOs from companies that I worked with in traditional sport back when I was still in cricket and rugby and football. And I think the lowest quote was something like £10,000, something like that, which, in the grand scheme of things for a big one-off project is not that much. But there was no way anybody was slightly interested in spending that amount of money at the time. And it's not something we've ever readdressed, because the principal integrity issues were in fact addressed. And look, we've had a couple of problems. I'm not saying that those have been addressed fully, because you've still got issues around crowd prompting, visibility of screens, guys giving signals from the crowd, or noise. LAN events, the thing that bothered me most about LAN events was how easy it was to access the players, how the player and sort of match official backstage area in the early days was so insanely easily accessible.
Right.
And still remains to some extent vulnerable outside of your big events like ESL1 Cologne or Katowice, where you'd struggle to get backstage at the big ones there. But there's still an awful lot of accessibility to players. And I think from a fan perspective, that's a good thing. But from a vulnerability perspective and from a match fixing and contact with bad people perspective, it's not good. But of course, they're so easily accessible on social media that it's almost irrelevant. So from that perspective, things have improved a lot, but I would be much, much happier if there was an agreed set of standards for all esports events around live event safety and security. I think it's an industry-wide problem. It's not a Counter-Strike problem. It's an industry-wide problem. I really think that there are three common issues in esports, broadly speaking. Doesn't matter whether you're 50 guys playing Splatoon in a cyber cafe in Singapore, or you're 45,000 people in the Spodek watching IM Katowice Counter-Strike. There are three common problems. The one is integrity, obviously. The other is youth protection, so basic safeguarding of young people in the esports environment. And the other is live event safety and security, which just has never been properly looked at in a proper esports holistic context. And so those need to be addressed. We're obviously addressing the integrity element with ESIC, but I'm very, very conscious, and we're just beginning to explore the safeguarding and youth protection wellness space with some people in the States. And then live event safety and security is something that really needs to be ramped up when LANs return.
Right.
Post-pandemic, yeah. It is a big problem. And cheating is just one element of that, as you've identified. Bad USBs we've come across them. One of the cheats that we dealt with, I'm going back even 2.5, 3 years ago, was embedded in a mouse brought in by a player.
Can you tell me more about that? Is there any details you can give?
I can give you details of the... So basically, it was exactly as it sounds. It was triggered by the guy, the wheel spin. So his normal left-right movement on the mouse did nothing. But if he spun back on the wheel, it initiated the cheat, which was a good but pretty basic wall hack. And then if he spun it the other way, it disabled it. So you couldn't detect it except for those few seconds that he used it, And the anti-cheat didn't pick that up at all. And that was, we only found that because he basically copped out and confessed at when he was accused, because it was so bloody obvious. I mean, he was shooting through smoke. He knew where everybody was. It was kind of,
right.
He was a bad cheat.
Are you able to say what tournament it was at?
Yeah, it was at an ESL India event. It wasn't the Forsaken thing. It was a Counter-Strike. It was a LAN actually, which was a bit of a surprise. But it was about a year after the Forsaken case, which was very odd given, we'd caught a guy before doing more or less exactly the same thing. And this kid came along and tried it. Fortunately, it was only during the qualifiers, the sort of tournament before the tournament. It was being played behind closed doors at a hotel. And so we were able to just, get rid of him and sort of shut the whole thing down before it became a serious problem for the tournament.
Gotcha. I was wondering if there was any updates on the status of the match fixing that ESIC was working into. I think it was specifically in North America. Are you able to speak on that, or is it still under wraps?
I'm afraid I can only speak in general terms. There are two distinct elements to this investigation, which I can tell you. The one is that we have a very focused investigation around where we have really, really good corroborating evidence from Discord, from various chat log screenshots and recordings of players that we are going to ban for a very, very long time, a group. The reason I say that there's two elements to this is that this particular group of players, where I'm optimistic that we'll be able to go public with this soon, within the next sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. But it is part of a far bigger investigation, which is going to take us a little bit longer, unfortunately, which is that there has been, amongst a relatively small but significant group of players over a long period of time, organized match fixing in North American MDL, which is different to what the betting scandal that we saw in Australia, where whilst it was a large group of players, and there definitely is match fixing there, and we'll be finished, we're working with law enforcement there, and it takes a lot longer once you start working with the police, because fortunately in Australia, these are criminal offenses. And so getting it all coordinated with the police takes a lot longer. We've got great solid cases there, and if it was just us acting alone, we could announce those prosecutions now. But it isn't all 42 guys that were betting. It's a much smaller group that within that were not just betting, but manipulating outcomes. In North America, it's much more serious, what I would describe as classic match fixing. In other words, it's players being bribed by outside betting syndicates in order to fix matches, rather than players just kind of doing it off their own bat opportunistically. And it's been going on for longer. It's much more organized. So and again, to some extent, working with law enforcement, with the FBI, who only recently have had a sports betting investigative unit within the FBI. So they're quite, they're good, but they're inexperienced, because sports betting has never been a big thing in America until recently. And so everybody's kind of finding their feet on that one. So that's the second part, is a much more serious part. The first part we'll deal with, quite quickly, because we're dealing with idiots, basically.
It's probably a little strange to the FBI to hear that it's about esports betting and not sports betting as well.
So basically, they came to their first sort of international betting fraud match fixing conference with Interpol back in December of 2019. And I addressed that meeting, and that would have been their first encounter with esports. And then obviously the world kind of exploded in 2020. I got too busy to carry this on. But also esports betting didn't really grow in America in a legal sense. I mean, there's a lot of people betting on esports in America, but they're all betting illegally. The legal betting scene has been very, very slow to take off, because people are much more interested in traditional sports betting, NFL, and so all those deals have been really getting up and running because sports betting was only really legalized in the previous year. So there's a long way to go in terms of legalized esports betting in the United States. There's still only about 7 states where it's even legal as part of their sports betting rollout.
Right.
So we've the sort of creation of a legal betting framework for esports in America is going to have it working well and serving the esports betting community well is going to take another 5 years, because the regulation of sports betting in America is just chaotic. It's state by state, it's tribal authority by tribal authority, and most of the states have got absolutely no idea what they're doing. So you've basically got 50 different potential regulatory and licensing regimes. It's a mess.
It's similar to what the UFC dealt with.
You know. Sorry, what was that?
It's similar to what the UFC dealt with. They had to get individual approval in every different state to be able to operate in them.
And you know, they're a sport with a very high profile where you've got one single governing body that can go along and lobby and do deals. Esports doesn't have that, right? Esports is 50 different sports, all trying to sort of carve their way around, and you've got the big ones, the ones that are good betting products, are Counter-Strike, Dota 2, and League of Legends, which basically means that it's Riot and Valve, and neither of those companies have the slightest interest in supporting or fostering a betting environment or culture. Which, you know, I'm not arguing with them. We're not an organization that advocates for betting. We're an organization that really exists because betting exists. We're pragmatic. We're not out there trying to get people to bet on esports. You know, I'm completely neutral in that respect. But what we do know is that betting brings, as much as it brings good stuff like fan engagement and sponsorship dollars and all that stuff, it has a bad side, which is what we're trying to deal with. And you know, I'd rather we had a bit of breathing space to deal with that, but unfortunately we don't. Because
the skin betting sure did bring in a shitstorm for Counter-Strike. It was just crazy for a while.
If Valve hadn't clamped down on that in 2016, we were projecting skins revenue, so handle on skins in 2017. We were expecting about $7.2 billion of skins to be bet.
I'm sure all legitimate. No illegal crime there, eh?
All illegal. Well, not true. A lot of it wasn't illegal. It was unlawful. But because it was unregulated, there was no law that covered it, because technically the skins are just virtual items. They're not money. They are. Yeah, we all knew they were money, but from a legal point of view, that was quite a difficult situation, because you know, I was going along to state regulators saying, hey, you guys should regulate this, and they'd have a look at it and go, yeah, but it's not money. It's just digital crap. You go, well, yeah, except that I can take this digital crap and turn it into money in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they started getting interested, particularly the Washington regulator, and then he put pressure on Valve, and then they stopped it, more or less. You know,
right? It's kind of like Bitcoin.
You can still gamble with skins, as in you can play like roulette and blackjack and all that crap. Not in America, it's difficult, but there's still, you know, some pretty lucrative betting operations. But you can't bet on sports. So you can or esports. You can, but again, it's tiny. It's not affecting our world at all, really.
Right.
But you can still gamble with skins.
Unfortunately,
it's doable.
Yeah. Before I let you go here, one last question. What are my chances of getting tournament organizer provided mice for the major coming up later this year? Slim to nil?
Yeah. I'd put it at 1% or less.
Good thing I'm not a betting man.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that. No, look, we'd love to get there, and I am discussing this with our members like Pro League and Blast, and so basically working together with both of them to try and create a standard that can cascade down to the lower levels. That's the way we've decided to approach it, but it's going to take a while.
Gotcha. All right, Ian, thank you for your time. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me, and take care. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, take care.